Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. We're going to begin with a short video presentation that was put together by some of the staff in the Department of Communication.
He is a former high school teacher. Before he came to Wayne, one of the great debate coaches in the entire Detroit school system. He's a baseball expert. He knows more facts about baseball than I could ever read in a number of books. He came here, got his doctorate, and established his career at Wayne State University. 20 years as department chair, a beloved professor, a wonderful guy. Please welcome my good buddy, Ed Pappas.
My mom and dad were both immigrants. They were born in Asia Minor. Anybody that's got a priest in the family becomes Pappas because that means Pappas in Greek. My grandfather was a Greek Orthodox priest. My dad came over in 1918, and then my mother joined him about 7 or 8 years later. He became a restaurateur. I was born in Detroit. And then we finally moved to Highland Park, and I went to Highland Park High School. And so he had a little restaurant called John's Coney Island, and I worked in it and my sister worked in it, and my brother worked in it too.
Do you remember your first ball game that you attended as a kid?
I do, 1941. The Philadelphia Athletics, and we would sit in the left field stands, and we would be screaming, "We want a homer, we want a homer." And I finished the 12 years and then the 2 years free college at that point, and that's when I went to Wayne.
Right.
And but by that time, the Korean War had started, and I got drafted.
You enjoyed how many years of marriage together?
57.
57
I beat
years?
DiMaggio by one. DiMaggio had 56 straight games, remember?
Yeah, right.
Met her in 51, married her in 54.
54.
We had Karen in 57.
57.
And then EJ, who just had his 55th birthday.
EJ, that's Edward John Jr.
Edward John III.
Your second child, born in what year?
61.
61.
Tigers finished second that year. And then 68, the Tigers won a
Tigers won a
championship.
champion.
And that's
David.
David
is.
Yeah.
Growing up in our family was probably not typical from the standpoint that we didn't do a lot of television watching. We did a lot of talking. You know, we would have conversations. We would sit around the table and talk. We would sit around the living room and talk. But the other kind of interesting thing about him is that the two of them were a real unit. You know, they kind of morphed into each other's likes and dislikes and provided a real united front. My dad was a lover of Detroit. You know, he has been a champion for this city as long as I can remember. We would take trips to Belle Isle. He popped us in the car and drove us down to Detroit after the Tigers won the pennant in 1968 when my mom was pregnant with my brother. So, you know, I've always had this love of the city. If you've ever been anywhere with my dad, he doesn't, you know, make sure that you're all together and walking. He pretty much gets to wherever he wants to go. Where are you going, Dad? I don't know. My mom had the gift of hospitality. It wouldn't be anything for her to just say, oh, come on over for supper. Dad spent a lot of time in his office. In our basement, he had a little office that was kind of closed off. We didn't mess with him, especially when it was time for him to do the bills. We all knew that that wasn't a good time to hang out and make noise.
It was a really interesting time. The Department of Communication at Wayne State was really a college. It was a huge, huge department. And Ed Pappas was the chair. He really was the director or the dean at that point.
Over time, there was a move to split the large College of Liberal Arts into smaller colleges. There was a formation of a fine arts college. It became a smaller department. It was still a fairly large department. Ed was a staunch defender and advocate of the department. He would go in to see one of the associate deans, and they would talk about, okay, which classes are you going to cut? And Ed would say, well, I can't cut any classes. I need all my classes. But we would walk out, and typically we would not be cutting classes. And he was always an advocate for the students. He was an advocate for the faculty in his program. And he was a very strong administrator.
Pappas's 5 P's of public speaking. Number 1 is purpose. What are you up there?
Right.
Number 2 is plan. How are you going to get to your goal? 3 is preparation. Hello, you got to prepare. 4 is practice. You don't just get out and do it, you practice. And then polish.
Right.
You know what polish is?
Yes.
The difference between 87 and 7. Can you imagine if Lincoln had gotten up and said 87 years ago, would we be quoting his speech? But he said 7 years ago.
How about that?
You know, baseball is kind of a metaphor for life.
So who's the first one we're going to talk about?
Who?
That's what I'm asking. Who's the first one?
That was his name, who?
Wait a minute. All I want to know is what's the name of the guy?
No, what is the second guy? Who's the first guy?
I'm not asking you what's the name of the first guy. Who's the first guy? Who? That's what I want to know.
That's his name, who?
Look, it's very simple, Ed. All these guys taught classes. There's
They
4
did.
of them. Okay, let's say when the first guy went to his class, walked in, stood in front of the students, who taught the course?
Exactly.
What?
No, what second?
What's the second? I don't know.
He's the third guy.
Wait a minute. Who's the first guy? What's the second guy? I don't know. There's a third guy.
Exactly.
So what you're saying is that when these guys taught here and they come in to work in the morning, who says hello to what? What says hello to who? They both say hello to I don't know. I don't know says
That's
hello
it,
to
that's
what
it.
and who.
That's it.
You know what? I don't care.
That's the 4th guy.
I'm Matt Seeger. I'm Dean of the College of Fine Performing and Communication Arts, and Ed hired me in 1982 after a grueling interview and proceeded to work me too hard for the next 30 years. But it was all wonderful. So I want to thank Kelly Gottesman and Kim Piper-Aiken and Jim Irwin for that amazing video that was based on some footage that we recorded for Ed not too long ago as part of a program that Jim Irwin is helping us put together. I've thought much about the most appropriate way to celebrate Ed's optimistic spirit, his long and distinguished history, and his rich contributions to all of us. After much consideration and consultation, I concluded that nothing could be more appropriate than a speech contest. So welcome to the first annual Edward J. Pappas Memorial Eulogy Contest. We have 9 speakers today. We've drawn for speaker order, which you see listed in your program. Each speaker has between 5 and 7 minutes. Stories need only be partly true, and speakers receive extra points for humor, any reference to the Tigers, and any mention of Greek food or culture. Just as a reminder, a eulogy is a form of epideictic discourse. Aristotle, who was Greek, defined epideictic as the rhetoric of ceremony and commemoration. This form of rhetoric deals with virtues such as goodness, excellence, nobility, beauty, and the ability to hit the fastball, or at least remember everyone who hit the fastball. The eulogy is a speech of praise to celebrate the virtues of a person as a model for us all. With that brief introduction, let me introduce our 9 contestants. First, E.J. Pappas is the oldest son of Ed and Eunice. He lives in the Boston area where he occasionally cheers for the Red Sox. Vicki Dallas is the longest-serving member of the Department of Communication. I'm the second longest. Ed hired her in 1981. Captain Don Kippola is a Wayne State alum and very close friend of Ed's over many, many years, and they had many wild adventures together. Dr. Don Ritzenheim is a 3-time alum of Wayne State University and a longtime friend and lunch partner of Ed's. Sue Nine is an alum, and along with Millie Irwin, who is here today, probably knew Ed the longest. Ed was her high school debate coach. Dr. James Irwin is also an alum of the Communication Department and a great supporter and friend of Ed's. Jim produced a series of videos which I mentioned about the history of the department. Dr. Manny Stiles is also an alum of the PhD program here at Wayne State, and Ed was his doctoral advisor. That must have been quite an experience, Manny. Manny has had a very long and distinguished career in communication and consulting. Dr. Sandra Petronio is not an alum, but she did teach here, and she met Ed when she was a graduate student at another school located up the road where they play football. And finally, David Pappas, our closer for our contest, is the youngest son of Ed and Eunice and is following in his father's footsteps as a teacher of speech and English. So please join me in welcoming our first speaker.
Hello, everyone. This is either my dad's second memorial or his 4th retirement. I think going to be with my mother was the only way that he was going to stop teaching, stop retiring, and finally stop these endless get-togethers. So, just over 3 months have passed since my father passed away. I eulogized him at his funeral, which was difficult but cathartic for me. I talked of his relationship with my mother and others, his bond for baseball, and how food was a narrative for our times together. I'd share that with you, but that eulogy was longer than a viewing of Nicholas Nickleby, and would leave Don Kilpler with nothing to say, as I did last time for him. So I've mercifully decided to go in another direction with these remembrances. My dad, whenever bored, in any of his circumstances, be it at home, at church, at work, or at a ball game, would make lists. So, lowest ERA by a left-handed reliever over 40. Most stolen bases by a one-eyed Venezuelan with a limp. You get the idea. So to that end, I have Ed's top 5 mantras to live by. Number 1, never make a decision before you have to. This mantra was something that my father used, whether it pertained to the management of people or making decisions in his life. Dad would always preach patience over action. He'd remind me that your job is to understand the challenges and appreciate the dynamics before making a decision and moving forward, in order to put yourself in the best position. I often erred on action for action's sake, and I perceived lack of action as weakness. My dad urged never to force the hand, let life come to you. And I find that to be good advice then and today. Number 2, treat others with respect. This applied to students, faculty, neighbors, family, and total strangers. While my father could certainly command a room when he chose to, one of his greatest gifts was listening. Treating others with respect meant letting people finish their thoughts. He allowed you to have your opinion. He could disagree and debate your points and its merits, but he was never dismissive. He was receptive to disagreement and appreciated discussion. And it allowed for insights and wisdom to come from the most unexpected places, like a Highland Park, Coney Island, or a guy sitting behind him in a ball game, or the pharmacist or the cashier at Myers. My dad listened, and listening is a good thing. Third, if you can't say it correctly, I'll say it for you. You take it away and you bring it to me. When you lay, you need an object. Ed and I versus Ed and me. Making a point at our family dinners growing up was especially difficult. if your grammar was at all faulty. My father argued about the use of whose, or who is. We discussed the fundamental aspects of fantasy chaining and rhetorical sensitivity. How you said what you said was just as important as what you said while you were saying it. Some people sit around the dinner table and talk about talk about politics or religion. Oh, if we'd been that lucky. Number 4, people can only give you what they have to give. This may be my father's greatest lesson to me. It helped me through divorce and personal loss, through job change, and through challenges with my family and with friends. It was the simple truth that people are generally doing the best that they can. But it is the way that we receive what they are saying and what their actions are that causes us stress and anxiety, not necessarily the way that the people are responding to us in the first place. This simple truth helped me understand that we should not shoot the messenger, as I often spend my time doing, but accept what we get and never settle for less than the best. Thanks, Dad. Last, not least, when in doubt, the answer is baseball. Baseball was my dad's metaphor for life, as he said so conveniently earlier. Life was going all 9 innings. My dad, he knew when it was, quote, time to go to the bullpen. How was the sermon Sunday, Dad? Well, it was interesting, but the minister threw too many pitches. How was my school paper? You made a lot of good points, but you were wild around the plate. If you knew my dad's shorthand, his responses were very clear and very insightful, and it didn't take a lot of back and forth to understand his point. I miss those points terribly. In conclusion, my father used to say that the best pitch in baseball is strike 1. He lived 87 full, robust, memorable, and glorious years. He taught students who have taken his wisdom and his stories and his terrible, terrible jokes with them for their entire lives. For me, he was my advisor, he was my mentor, he was my father, but mostly he was my friend. And he always welcomed me at his house with a big smile, with an open arm, and with a chai latte. And one thing I know for sure is the simple fact that we never get enough time with our fathers. And I miss the old man. Thanks.
Hello. As many of you know, Ed Pappas was my dear friend. In fact, he was my very best friend. And hearing the word very, I know Ed is up there smiling at me because he said I used the word very way too much. He said that was one of my peccadillos. And I will tell you about peccadillos in just a moment and how I learned the word. Ed didn't start out being my good friend. He started out being my boss. And he was a very demanding boss. And after being my boss for a while, he became my mentor. And he mentored me right out of my comfort zone. He sometimes would give me assignments that I thought were impossible. And when I complained, I used to say to him, I can't do that. And he would say to me, you don't know how good you are, Mrs. Dallas. And then he'd say, and I don't have anybody else to give this to, so it's yours. But by challenging me, he not only built my expertise in certain areas, but he also built my self-confidence. And I will always be grateful for that. And it wasn't easy being Ed's friend. Ed quickly learned what your foibles were, and he used them against you. He learned that I had a quick temper, was annoyed easily, and I could be embarrassed easily. And so when Ed got bored, he would come down to my office and he would amuse himself at my expense. And this is true, this is not me. I'm going to give you examples. Example 1 I will call the catalog. There was one day that the staff and I had gotten a hold of a Victoria's Secret catalog. This was in the 1980s. And in the 80s, this was quite a novelty. You know, most of us were buying our underwear at Kmart in packages of 3. So when Victoria's Secret came along, you know, it was a pretty big deal. So we were looking at the catalog and we were all giggling, and Ed got wind that something was up. So he comes out, and I figured, well, you better get out of here and go do some work. And so I took the catalog and headed back to my office. He followed me. So he says to me, he stands in my doorway, "What are you and the staff up to, Mrs. Dallas? What foolishness are you up to?" I said, "We're not doing anything." But he knew something was up, and he knew he could embarrass me, so he was going to stand there till I gave up the catalog, which I ultimately did. I said, "Well, if you're so interested, here it is." And we were looking at brakia. And if you know Greek, that means underwear. It's a very coarse word for underwear in Greek. So he laughed, he had gotten the better of me, and he walked back to his office. The story doesn't end there. I was pretty annoyed with him. So I said, "Well, if you want to see these pictures so badly, we're going to make sure that you do." So the staff and I, and they were very willing in this, cut all of the pictures out of the catalog and plastered them all over Ed's office while he was out to lunch. The part that we didn't realize was that he was going to come back from lunch with a colleague. And so when he opened the door, he wasn't too happy. The colleague happened to be one of the associate deans. I thought my career at Wayne was going to end very shortly after that, but he ultimately forgave me. Story 2, example 2, we'll call the calendar. One holiday, someone in the family gave Ed a word of the day calendar. Must have been one of you 3. You don't think that that's going to be an instrument of torture, but in the right hands it could be. Ed would pop into my office daily with a question such as, "Do you know what a Rubicon is, Mrs. Dallas?" And when I would give him a blank stare, he would laugh and say, "Well, look it up. You should know these things." And he would walk away giggling that he had succeeded again in annoying me. Next day, pop in again. "I will buy you lunch, Mrs. Dallas, if you could tell me what peccadillos are." Well, to me that sounded like something that scampered around in the desert. But it's not. You can look it up. The daily quizzing continued all year long. Some days I would know the word, and some days I would not. On days I didn't know the word, he would be very delighted because he had the opportunity to educate me. He even gave me an American Heritage Dictionary that I still have on my desk. Needless to say, my vocabulary increased that year, but I often fantasized of burning the calendar. Example 3, my final example, the comm class. Later in his career, after he had retired, Ed was teaching part-time. He was teaching the public speaking class. And he talked me into helping him teach the class. So we were co-teaching the class. And it was a good experience for me because Ed was a master teacher and I learned from him, watching him in the classroom. And it was good for Ed because Ed didn't use the technology very well. He couldn't use Blackboard. And so I would post all of the materials and do the grading. Well, early in the term, we were doing introductions. We wanted to introduce each other so then the students would understand how to do an introduction. So I introduced Ed. You know, I told them that he was the former department chair, a scholar in pedagogy, a historian in baseball, and so on. And he introduced me, told them that I had been in the department a long time, I'd worked with students over the years, and so on. And then, to end the introduction, he says to them, "And as a sideline, Mrs. Dallas belly dances at the local taverna on Saturday night, and you can catch her act." There was a little bit of a silence in the classroom, and then after a few minutes, Ed and I broke out laughing, and the class understood that this was a joke, and that they also were going to have a very fun semester with the 2 of us in the classroom. Ed was fun. He was a lot of fun. He was also kind and he was caring.
And he was the very best friend that one can ask for, and I will miss him dearly. Thank you.
I better bring my stopwatch. I had a real nice speech, all prepared, all written out. And then I got that email from Matt Seeger. You got 5 minutes, 5 or 7 minutes. I said, what am I, in an advanced speech class? So there goes the speech. It was worthless, it was much too long. More than that, Matt puts in there, you have to have some plausibility in your story, which ends all the embellishments that I want. So no more embellishment. So there I am, I've got no speech, nothing to say about my good friend of 50 years. Betty said, my wife, here 66 years next week. We're going to be next week. One listens to that, if you want to survive. So anyway, she said, what are you going to talk about? I said, well, I'm going to start out by saying that we were two servicemen. He came out of the Army, I came out of the Marine Corps, and that we were looking for a new career. And we were working on our graduate degree, and we were in our late 20s, early 30s, starting on a whole new career. She said, that's all about you. You can't give that speech. Oh. Well, then I thought I'd tell about our 50-year friendship, our 250 long letters that we shared back and forth. She said, well, that's all about you again. So you're involved in that. I said, well, I was involved with everything Eddie did. I mean, mostly that. I'm concerned. I was involved with him. It's got to be about me in a way, isn't it? Doesn't it have to be a little bit about me? Well, one does not argue with somebody that you've been married to for 66 years. So I began looking and searching, what could I talk about? What could I say about this man who has been such a dear, dear friend? We traveled together, we gave speeches together. I never worked for him, and I never worked with him. So I don't know about his career as chairman or as professor or and so forth, but I knew him as a personal friend. Somebody who was, as was just, Vicki just mentioned, a character. One of the things that I thought I would mention, there were two stories. One of them involved me, unfortunately, and one of them did not involve me. And I just want to share those two stories with you. The first one is he had become chairman of the department. This was a big step. We had sat in the car after class one time, and he was debating whether he wanted to leave Pershing High School to join the university. And George Bowman, love his heart, had cobbled together enough pay to get Eddie into become an instructor, and then an assistant professor, and then an associate professor, and finally a full professor. Of course, George, you know, if you know George Bowman, he's not going to do this lightly. He told Eddie while they were cobbling together his argument to be full professor, he said in his own little supercilious way, he said, if only you could write. Eddie loved that. But anyway, so now he's chairman. And he's a new chairman. And I arrived, bopped into town from up north, where I live. And I walked into the department. You know where that chairman's office is, in the corner of Manugia, and there was Eddie sitting at the desk, the chairman of the speech department. What a step. And there was George Bowman standing outside the door, standing there. So I walked up and I put my arm around George's shoulder and I said, George, I said it loud enough so Ed would hear me. How does it make you feel to see him sitting in your chair? George rolled his eyes, you know, and kind of rolled his eyes, got that little look in his face. And then I walked into the office and I sat down and Eddie walked over and he closed the door rather firmly. I knew I'd done something wrong. And he proceeded to bawled me out. We never had crosswords ever in our entire relationship. He just read the riot act to me. He said, I have enough problems in this organization trying to get everybody to work together. The other day I was thinking about this when I read Reince Priebus's comment about Ivana being in a meeting with Ivana, Jared, Steve Bannon, Kelly Conway himself. It was like he said it was like having a snake, a rat, and an alligator all in a zoo without walls. Very bloody. So Eddie was describing this. He said, I've had all these problems with these people, and you come in here, bouncing in here, talking this way, making me look like a fool. What are you doing that for? Geez, I was floored. I said, Eddie, I'm sorry. I really am. I apologize. I should never have done that. I was just kidding. Well, I know you were kidding, but that's not proper. Do we not have lunch? Want to have lunch? I got over it. One day Eddie called me up. And he said, you know, I have a lot of troubles with George. It's awkward. It's awkward being in the department. You know, George, he was the kind of person that would say, I stand up and pray, I don't kneel. So when I say the creed, I only say the first 7 words. You know, I mean, George, he was positive about his life. He knew what he wanted. And he said, I've had problems with George. It's awkward to be with him. I'm the chairman, I don't feel like a chairman. He said, the other night, George called me, and he asked us to come over for dinner. So Eunice and I went to George's house. George and Gladys had a nice dinner. He said it wasn't very awkward, it was quite nice, very pleasant. And after dinner, George said to Edward, he says, you know, I'm getting rid of my library. So I want you to come in here and get a few books. And he gave him a couple of shopping bags. And then he walked into the library and he looked over. He thought to himself, this is interesting. He's giving away his books. George was a man of words and power. He's transferring to me this power, this chairmanship. He said, I felt good. I felt kind of good. So he said, I took down a book. Yeah, no, don't take that top shelf. That's for Bob and Ray are going to have some of those. Any of the others. So Eddie was looking and he found an old elocution book he didn't want, but he's got to fulfill this destiny. And he starts filling this bag with these books. Oh, this is nice. Oh, I like this one, George. I like this. So he finally had them both half full and picks up his bags and then took them to the living room. Well, the evening went on. It was toward the end of the evening. Now comes the moment of departure. Eddie's thinking all this time, wow, I feel so enlarged. I feel so elevated. George is giving me his books. And he put his coat on and picked up those bags, and Eunice already had her hand on the doorknob ready to leave. And he's standing there and he looks at, and George was in the middle of the living room and Eddie was standing there, and George said, you know, Eddie, he said, I couldn't take over $10 for those books.
Boy, I hadn't thought about George Bowman in forever. It's so true. So, as we all know, Ed was a teacher, and as Vicki reminded us, one of his favorite teaching techniques was the quiz. And very often the quiz involved baseball. So things like name 5 players whose names are colors, or 5 players whose names are complete sentences. Now, since I expect some of the rest of you will be coming up, I don't want to spoil your fun, so I won't give away, any of those answers, like I knew. But he didn't always, Whitey Ford, he didn't always Mookie Betts. he didn't always ask quizzes about baseball. Sometimes he quizzed on other things. So we're standing around waiting to go into one of the DSR DK banquets. And he says, at the Henry, so the doors were still closed, we were having our cocktails, and he says, Don, can you name the 10 Attic orators? Now, the Attic orators were a group of orators from the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, and the Greeks had put them together as exemplars to hand off to the Italians, so that the Italians would know the proper models for oratory. And I said, no, Ed, I can't name the 10 orators. But I said, I do remember from Jim Miesel's class that Gorgias was not one of them, because he was too flamboyant and too all over and too poetic and didn't fit the exemplar mode of the Greeks. Now, I don't know if it was that answer or the fact that they opened the doors and hit the gong, but dinner was served and I got free from having to answer questions about the Attic orators. I wish I had gone back to Ed and asked him, tell me more about the Attic orators, because I'm sure he would have placed 9 of them on the field. There would have been somebody at first base and a pitcher and so on, and then I'd be curious to know who he left as the manager. I think I Socrates, but I guess we'll never know. So we're driving back from the Russell Street Deli, and one of the places that Ed enjoyed going, and we split a Reuben sandwich, have a bowl of soup, and I'm driving him back, and he says, so Don, do you know the 4 P's of public speaking? And I said, which we heard a little bit earlier, and I'm learning now from the tape that there are variations on the theme of the P's of public speaking. So I said, no, I know the 5. I know the 5 pentan. I know the 5 canon. I'm not familiar with the 5 P's. So I'm thinking, okay, preparation. Yeah, but there's something first. So anyway, we got through the first 4. So it's purpose. On this day, it was purpose, preparation, practice, and presentation. So we got all 4, and in my mind, we've kind of like gone through it. Okay, we've gone from the beginning to the end. So what's the 5th P? So that day, the 5th P was passion. And he said, a speaker who doesn't have passion for the topic that they're talking about just can't really connect with the audience, can't really communicate. And we've seen it, not only in students, but sometimes, politicians. Introduction, check. Thesis, check. Transitions, check. But there's no there. And I think it's so appropriate that Ed added passion to his canon, because he was himself a person of passion. And we've heard stories already, and I'm sure we'll hear more. He was passionate about his discipline, his colleagues, his friends, his family, baseball, roses, you name it. And so I've been teaching that to my students, and I would encourage those of you who teach here, maybe share the same thing, the 5 P's from Ed Pappas. So it's purpose, planning, practicing, presentation, and passion. These 5, but the greatest of these is passion. So thank you, Ed, for that wonderful quiz.
When I first knew Ed Pappas, I didn't need glasses, but he didn't either. It seems only appropriate that I would open my remarks today with a quotation from a Greek. No, not Dr. Edward J. Pappas, but Socrates. Death is a very narrow theme, but it reaches a wide audience. Our favorite Greek would have been thrilled to see the audience assembled here today, and I eerily suspect he is actually listening to what we have to say. Most of you probably wonder how this nearly 80-year-old woman fit into Ed Pappas's long life. And usually I have been able to announce that I have known Ed longer than almost anyone in the room. But that, as Matt Seeger aptly pointed out, isn't true today, because Millie Michalski Irwin, present here today also, was present the day I met Ed Pappas for the very first time. You see, we were both students at Detroit's Pershing High School when Ed began his original teaching career. Though I am quick to point out that Billy is younger than me. Ed Pappas began his career as an English teacher, assistant debate coach, and in addition, he was assigned to become the coach of individual forensic events in 1956. Ed's boss, Theodore Baruch, a near-genius individual who was very demanding and uniquely odd, somehow recognized the wisdom of choosing Ed to take on the roles that he had zealously kept for himself for over 25 years, and time proved that he bet wisely on Ed's talent. You all know that Ed eventually went on to get a PhD from Wayne State, and he served a long-term chair of the communication department at this university. However, my relationship blossomed into a friendship that had nothing to do with that position, though I must admit that I have marveled at the fact that Ed told me he completed his 62nd consecutive year of teaching this year. He had an awesome career in which he reveled in the successes of the thousands of students who passed through his life and commented to me often about that fact. But I have used many of the lessons Ed taught me for over 60 years. I loved being a debater and had a pretty successful high school career, being equally blessed by having some bright individuals as my partner. However, it was in extemporaneous speaking that Ed taught me the most. He spent hours making me prepare opening and closing statements that I could adapt to almost any speaking topic. That era was marked by the tightening of Russia's Cold War efforts, and my favorite speech opening, approved by Ed, was "When Russia sneezes, the United States catches pneumonia." I could make that work on any topic. I won the title I won the state title, in fact, in extent because of Ed's coaching, a coaching style which never seemed hard to tolerate, and he was always excited and profuse in his accolades when I met success. Over the years, though, our relationship changed dramatically from that of student and teacher to that of friend and friend. I will always hold memories of the many breakfast meetings that we have shared over the last 20 to 30 years as very special moments in my personal life. Now, it is well known that Ed was a champion of baseball trivia, and I feel obligated to tell you that I have a seriously pathetic knowledge base of baseball. So we never, ever talked about that sporting event. So you probably wonder what we did talk about, and I must confess that we spent hours talking about all of you. Ed could have written a history of the many people who ran through his life, and frankly, I sometimes found his innate ability to recall ages and dates to be irritating. Ed never hesitated to introduce me to someone that I should meet through him by giving my exact age, the year of my high school graduation, the year of my marriage, etc. Somehow that all seemed natural when Ed made those announcements, though I think most ladies would have appreciated him more if he had shaved just a few years off their age. On another occasion that I will share with you with the sordid details at another time, my younger brother's research paper was due, which my mother had convinced me to help him write in 1959. She was convinced that my brother was not going to graduate from high school if I didn't help him meet the deadline that Ed Pappas had set for submission of his senior term paper. My Sergeant Bilko-style brother happily turned in the typewritten paper I spent the weekend putting together for him, and 2 weeks later, Ed returned the paper with a note at the top, which read, "Your sister got an A, you got an E." Despite that fact, my brother somehow received a B in his senior English class, for which my mother was forever extremely grateful. Karen, EJ, and David, we have followed you more closely than you probably ever guessed. No one had a mother or father who could have loved their children more. We knew you since you were born, knew of your successes as you grew up, and have smiled approvingly as we've learned of your professional accomplishments. You are well positioned to carry on the traditions of a really marvelous family, and we hope you cherish the memory of your parents even half as much as the speakers here today will suggest. Few families have the blessings of such a legacy. In closing, I thought it would be only appropriate to recite a quotation from at least one baseball great. Jackie Robinson said, "A life is not important except in the impact it has on other lives." Ed Pappas had the distinction of impacting thousands of lives in the most wonderful way, and we give thanks for his life and the lessons we have taken from him. We will miss you, Ed, but you will remain in our hearts until our own end of time. Dear Ed, God bless your soul.
Unforgettable. That's what my term is for Edward John Pappas. Our buddy, our friend, our mentor, our wonderful guy, and who could possibly forget someone who was a poster kid for a life well lived. Someone who had an impact on everything he touched, and who not only touched all of us here, he didn't just touch us, he slammed into us like Ricky Henderson treated second base. And that was over 50 years ago for both Millie and me, and it was wonderful, wonderful. Today I'm going to talk to you about two major things. One, personal commonalities that Ed and I had, and those in the areas of baseball, this wonderful university at Wayne State, and some personal things. And the second thing I'm going to talk about is a television show that was mentioned by Matt, and the kinds of things we did with it. So, first of all, baseball. We both had common ground in certain things. We both believed that the greatest player who ever lived was Ty Cobb. He holds records that will never be broken. And we also believe that the greatest man who ever played the game was Jackie Robinson. The crap that he took is unbelievable. The stuff that he had to put up with. And he put up with it because he knew that if he did things right, other black players would follow him. And that was his main concern. So treat me what you want. And the third thing that we agreed upon was not only that the baseball had an impact on all of our lives, but that baseball itself was a fundamental part of our society and the most important sport. We agreed with that. The second thing we want to talk about is Wayne State University, this wonderful university that we all love. We had three common areas of commonality. One, we believe that George Ziegelmuller was the greatest impact player of his generation, earning more trophies with his teams than all of the athletic people combined, and that there's never been another person quite like George. The second thing is Wayne State, we believe that Paul and Sue Nine should be someday declared a national treasure. I mean that. We both believe that sincerely. And the third thing that we believed here at Wayne State was that the brightest star to ever hit Wayne State's campus in our lifetime is Matthew Wayne Seeger. And his star is still shining bright. And a standing joke. Hey, is the dean really into his job? Are you kidding? His middle name is Wayne. Thank God he came here in our generation. Third thing I want to talk about is personal kinds of things, personal thoughts. We both believed and felt very sincerely that we were through our marriages that Ed and I were automatically elected into the Lucky Guy Hall of Fame. And secondly, we believe that we both had superstar daughters named Karen, who made us proud every day. And the third thing that we believed was that humor is the essence of a productive life. We joked all the time, Ed and me. We told all kinds of, he'd call me one time and tell me something that he's thinking about. Give you an example. Not too long ago, he said, I'm going to give a speech at the church. I'm going to tell them how baseball was in the Bible. So baseball is in the Bible? I'd be sure. First words of Genesis, in the big inning. That's Pretty good. But we joked all the time. In fact, it carried right into his family. I have a thing I like to do when I meet a father and son or a father and daughter, and I say to the kid, I say, how's it feel to have the best dad in the whole world, or the best mom and dad in the whole world? And usually they say, awesome, great, and the parents be. So I was over at Ed's place, and EJ was there, and Ed's standing here, and EJ's here. I said, EJ, how's it feel to have the best dad in the whole world? And EJ says, well, I don't know, I have to ask my son. It goes in the family. The second thing I want to talk about is the television productions that we had. Ed was the star of the show. It was called Remembering the Legendaries, and thanks to the unbelievable talents and dedication of Kim Piper-Aiken, we carry them off. So far, we've produced 5 shows, and Ed was the star of the show. His memory and the whole idea was to take these legendaries, the people like George Ziegler and Ed Pappas and others in the speech department, and to talk about them, see them through the memories of people who knew them or their families. The purpose was to have these shows archived at Wayne State, not to produce them for public consumption or whatever, but 50 years from now, imagine a student in history or in communication wanting to do a master's thesis or term paper or whatever on people in the past who put this university on the map. Those are the legendaries, and those we did. The first show we did was Ed Pappas. The second show was George Ziegler, and then we went on. We did a few with others, George Bowman and a few others. And Ed was the star of the show. We did it like a talk show. We had certain rules. One, we had to have it perform before an audience, because you get that spontaneous reaction, and Kim's students were more than willing to be our audience, and they were just so enthusiastic. It was great. And then the other thing was we never used titles. It was all first names. Ed, Jim, and whatever. We didn't, thinking that 50 years, 75 years from now, we don't want titles. Who's this guy? Jim, Ed, and so on. But we always started out with Ed and me, and you heard part of the audio. We did a Abbott and Costello thing, and we did others. You heard part of the audio from the show, and it was always featuring baseball. And this never hit the show, but Ed tried to convince me that the Greeks invented baseball. He said, oh yeah. He said it was a different game then. But when somebody, the right person, yelled out, "Kill the umpire," they did it. Anyway, we started out. I have a whole collection of baseballs signed by various baseball players, and Ed, I wouldn't tell Ed what was signed on those baseballs, whose signature was on it. So I'd have this cover, and I pull it off, and here's the baseball. I'll give you an example. Ted Williams, let's say, and others that you may know that are on the balls. And Ed would tell you a little bit about. People say he was a trivia expert. I go beyond that. There's something beyond trivia that I call it lore. For instance, I could name to him, I could tell him, I could make Ozzie Smith. Now, any baseball trivia expert could tell you Ozzie's stats. He was the Hall of Fame shortstop for the St. Louis Cardinals. And in the Hall of Fame, first ballot and all that. And any trivia expert could give you the stats, no problem. Ed could give you the lore. He'd talk about, Ozzie Smith had, the Wizard of Oz, sure. And he'd talk about how he had the softest hands in at the time and for an infielder. And he also was an acrobat. He'd go all out. He'd pull things like, here comes the ball, it took a bad hop, misses his glove, so he grabs the bare hand and throws the guy out at first. Now, who can do that, right? Ozzie Smith. Ed would tell you that kind of thing because he knew lore as well as trivia. So we go through the baseballs, and then we talk about the person involved. In Ed's case, we had family, we had friends, and people who knew him. In George's case, we always had panels and so on. It was great. Remembering the legendaries. If any of you, there are 5 shows that were completed so far. If any of you would like to see them, see Kim, she'll give you the place to pick it up. So therefore, I conclude by saying that's Ed, my personal things with baseball and Wayne State, personal things, and also the television show. Ed was one of a kind. Who could forget him? Wait a minute. Oh. Hi, Ed. We're talking about you. What? Yeah, Ricky Henderson. Yeah. Yeah. You know, the all-time person who stole all the bases more than anybody else. Yeah, right? Oh, no. He wants me to name the 9 teams that Henderson played for. Yeah, you know I can't do... What? Uh-huh. He not only named the teams, he put it in the years. Ed Pappas. Unforgettable.
When you think of everyone who's here who's been touched by Ed Pappas, you have to understand that there are all kinds of stories. My story with Ed began when I was the director of debate at McAllister College years ago. We had great students, great debaters, great orators. And I remember always coming to the interstate oratorical contest, and particularly with our women contestants. They did well. And that was back in the days, of course, when, as we traveled the debate scene, Ed was periodically on the turf. George Ziegler, of course, that was back in the day, and as we've heard, George Bowman, George Ziegler, Ray Ross, Jimmy Trent, and Edward Pappas. What a team that is when you think about it. I had the good fortune at a certain point at McAllister to be given an opportunity to pursue my doctorate. And off we came, because of those people, by the way, to Wayne State University. That was a special period of time. Detroit, there was smoke still coming off the horizon back in the late 60s, but it was a special time here at Wayne State. It was a family of individuals, supportive. I remember that I came down for 2 summer sessions and left my pregnant wife and 2-year-old son back in Minnesota. And so I had a lot of time to study. And somebody told me when I came, whatever you do, don't question Ed Pappas about baseball. Well, of course, that was the exact thing that caused me to go and study some of the obscure facts about baseball. And I remember going to the library and I found a book entitled Facts That No One Knows About Baseball. And I scoured through and I found a little example. And I waited for the opportune time when there were other people around to say to Ed Pappas, by the way, Ed, do you know who, it was a Major League Baseball pitcher who threw a baseball off the top of the Lincoln Monument. And do you know the Major League Baseball catcher, a different team, who caught it? And Ed looked at me and said, well, of course, that was so-and-so and so-and-so. I never asked him another question. Because you could not stump Ed Pappas when it came to that. But more than that, what I've discovered about Ed Pappas as I reflect over the years is that he was a person who cared about other people. And look at the heads now. No matter what our relationship with Ed and Eunice and the kids as they grew up, and I was only here for a short time. I was only here for 1 calendar year, and then completed all the coursework in 1 year, and then went back and did the writtens and the orals. And then, of course, Ed was my advisor. Now think about this lineup as an advising group. We had Ed Pappas, who was the key advisor. We had Ray Ross. We had George Bowman. We had Jimmy Trent. and we had Dr. Anderson in psychology. I did an 8-year study for my doctoral dissertation. And Ed Pappas was supportive all the way along. And then one day I'd gone back to McAllister. I was teaching, I was consulting, I was doing all kinds of interesting things. And I was not making the progress that I should. And one day I got a letter from the dean's office, and they said, "Dear Mr. Stile, I'm sorry to inform you that your 7 years are up." And of course, what do you do after you've been working hard all this time and they tell you that your time is up? So I called Ed and I said, "Ed, what do you think we should do?" And he said, "Well, it's pretty simple." He said, "Your doctoral dissertation was approved by so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and the title of my doctoral dissertation is An 8-Year Longitudinal Study of da." And he said, "You can't do an 8-year study in 7 years." So they gave me 6 months, and I buried myself, and we finished it. And everything went well, by the way, until the final dissertation exam, and that was all passed. Until George Bowman said, "By the way, you've got some split infinitives in this, and so you can clear that up." And Ed said, "Go clean up the split infinitives, but by the way, George won't read it beyond the first chapter." So my relationship with Ed has continued over the years because he's a delightful man. When I think of Ed Pappas, I think of all the things that have been said about him, but I think about, more importantly, a delightful man. His interest in baseball, of course, is obvious. 2 years ago, I invited him out to Minnesota because he hadn't seen the great Target Field in Minnesota. And he came out for, 3, maybe 4 days. And amongst other things, we went to a Minnesota game, Twin game. I got 2 tickets, 10 rows up, right behind home plate from a friend of mine, and he loved it. He loved that park. He loved the experience. And on the way out, as the game was over, we walked up the steps, and 2 rows up, on the end of the row was Kent Herbig. Now, most of you don't know who Kent Herbig is, but he was the first baseman when the Minnesota Twins won the World Series against St. Louis. And as we walked up, Ed stopped. And he looked at Kent Herbig and he said, "Kent Herbig." He said, "My name's Ed Pappas." He said, "I have a question for you." And Kent Herbig looked at him and he said, "What's the question?" Ed said, "Can you name the starting lineup of the Minnesota Twins when you won the World Series?" And Herbig said, "Yes, so-and-so was catching, so-and-so was pitching, I was at first base." He went around the whole 9 horn, and Ed said, "That's very good, that's very good." And then he said, "Can you name the starting lineup of the St. Louis Cardinals who you beat?" And Herbig looked at him and said, "Yes, the catcher was, the pitcher was, the first baseman was." He went right around the entire field. And Ed Pappas looked at Kent Herbig and said, "You know, young man," he said, "I have to tell you, you know your baseball and you're very good." Every place we went, I remember we went to a little restaurant over in Wisconsin. Every place we went, it didn't matter. Ed Pappas could talk to anyone, but he would always open with baseball. And there was a young man there with his family, and Ed all of a sudden was talking to him about baseball. As you know, you've all been there, any of you that have been close to Ed. He cared. He was not only interesting, he cared, and he could carry on, but he always put his focus, I found, in my time with him, on other people. he was one of those individuals. And as has been said, the children, you have a great legacy to follow. We know that. It's wonderful. I would simply say this. We talk about the 4 or 5 or whatever P's there are. I think there's a 6th P. And the 6th P is Pappas. The 6th P is Pappas, that we're here to remember, to memorize, and hopefully to follow in the steps of. Because in my opinion, we all have been fortunate to have that opportunity. I believe, in closing, simply this. I believe in some way or another, we all stand on the shoulders of giants. When you think about your life, wherever you're at, stage of life, we all stand on the shoulders of giants. Ed Pappas and Eunice and family, they were indeed giants. When we first came here, we started a little program for senior graduate students and senior faculty. We did round-robin dinners. It had not been done before. It was wonderful. We would go to some person's house, and they would put together the main meal. Everybody else would bring food. I remember the Greek dinners at the Pappas home. I remember the dinners elsewhere. When Ed came shortly, 2 years ago, I called Dr. Art Gracek, who also was a graduate of Wayne State in the speech department. And I said, Ed's going to be in town. Come on down. We'll have dinner together. And Art and Barb came. And of course, what do you suppose the conversation was about? Old times, good times, great times, but also baseball times. And it's the only time I ever saw Ed Pappas stumped. Because Barb Gracek, who was from North Dakota, as they started to talk about the baseball greats. Do you remember the baseball greats out of North Dakota? Who? Roger Maris. And Barb said to Ed, you know what high school Roger Maris went to? And Ed said, let me think about it. And then she said, and you know what the high school, and she named it, you know what it was, what the mascot was? And he raised both hands and he said, I give up. You're right. I don't know. And it was the only time I've ever seen Ed at a loss for words. God bless Ed. We love you, and we're all better because of you. Thank you.
Well, I don't know, maybe some of you know who I am. I'm Sandra Petronio, and I was here as a faculty member. But that was way after I got to meet Ed Pappas. I was at a Central States Communication Association meeting. I was a graduate student at Michigan, and I was wandering around. It was my first conference ever. And this guy comes up to me and he says, so, what's your deal? I said, I have no clue. He said, well, where are you teaching? Or where are you getting your degree from? And I said, Michigan. And he said, oh, okay. Things very perplexing. So I said, so what's the issue here? And he said, well, do you know anything about baseball? I said, but I think I'm batting 0 right now. And he said, I'm gonna help you because you didn't have any mentors at Michigan, and I'm going to be your mentor. I said, okay. We'll work on that. And we did. And he was such a delightful, wonderful person. And I think I'm probably the only person that he allows in his club that does not like baseball. So I feel very privileged by that. But we have really had a wonderful time together. Every time we went to a conference, we were there together, we'd go out to dinner, and of course a Greek dinner, which I loved, so that was a good thing. But this one time, a friend of mine came with us for these dinners, and he said, okay, now I have to introduce you, if you don't like baseball, you have to know more about Greek living. And he said, so we're going to have ouzo at this dinner. And I said, oh, okay, that's fine. Now, I'm a person that does not drink hard liquor at all, so he kept buying and buying and buying, and we were, having a great time. And then my friend and I walked back to the hotel, and I said, Jeannie, I think there's a llama on the street in New York City. We were in New York City. We were walking back to the hotel. I was like, is that a llama? I think that's a llama. And Jamie said, we better not go to dinner with Dr. Pappas again. I said, and the closer we got to the hotel, darn if there wasn't a llama on the street. So we felt vindicated. We had more music. But it was, I feel so pleased that I had this opportunity to get to know somebody as wonderful as Ed. And he was just the most terrific person for me to have encountered so early in my career. And he followed me all the time, every time I was with him, even though he would always ask me a baseball question. I would say, it's getting a little old, Ed. I don't know anything about baseball, and I'm not going to start now. But we would have these cute little interactions and everything, and it was just lovely. And I got to meet his son, David, more recently in my relationship with Ed, but it's so nice to have been a part of something that is so special. This doesn't happen to everybody and with everybody. So I dabble a little bit in writing poetry. It's not really poetry, it's like sort of my thoughts for the day. And I wrote it, and the mentoring is a tricky endeavor because he was a very good mentor to me. A mentor who stands behind, watches carefully, sparsely giving advice, but always meets the needs of college students without them even knowing it is the best of one kind. Ed Pappas. He brought to light a balance of illustrating the importance of treating others as equals. I had just the right measure of humor, making the others feel good and loved. There were never times he took revenge or blamed or disrespected others. Learning how to teach by example is an old adage, but clearly frames the remarkable gift Professor Pappas gave us. I was not officially a professor, I was not officially Professor Pappas' student, nor did I work for him. Yet, he taught me many lessons because it became a beacon of light, my progression, and most dear friend he was. You are missed, Professor Pappas, by your many friends and colleagues, and most of all, by your family. But the treasure you give us lives on. Thank you.
Well, my name is David, and before I say what I'm going to say, I want to say thanks on behalf of the family to Matt and to whoever else planned this. And it's an honor to be able to stand and just see people that loved our dad the way that we do. And this is extra to my remarks, but I feel like I need to say it. After my mother died, my father I spoke at my mom's funeral as well, and he would, as he would, I was visiting from Indianapolis, and I would sit in his den, and it would either be in the morning for a cup of coffee or maybe in the evening with a little ouzo or Macallan scotch. And he would look at me and he would say, "You going to speak at my funeral?" I said, "Sure, if you want me to, I'd love to." He'd say, "Do you know what you'd say?" And I'd say, well, I've thought about it, but I only have my opening." And he'd say, with a little glint in his eye, "What's the opening?" And I'd say, "Well, I think I'm going to start, Dad, with Ed Pappas. My father was a real asshole." He'd smile and laugh and say, yeah, that's good. That's good. And then the next time I'd see him a few months later, he'd say, "Thought any more about my eulogy?" I'd say, "No, Dad." He'd say, "You just still have that opening line. What's the opening line, Dad?" And I'd say it again. So it seems like that's my dad. Well, every summer, and I'm going to keep in the baseball theme here. Every summer in upstate New York, steps from the lakes, the banks of Seagull Lake, there's an induction ceremony in front of the Baseball Hall of Fame for the newest class of greats to ascend the pantheon of baseball gods. And the ceremony is comprised of speeches and memories, the recalling of great moments of years past. There's the enshrining of artifacts in the Hall's museum, bats, gloves, game balls, uniforms for fans and pilgrims to observe for years in the future, to be able to see the greats, the heroes and the legends they had only seen from afar. They would go in the hall where there are rooms filled with the images and artifacts that help fans remember those great moments, to help those of us see those great players, those great games, to see them again or see them anew. And in that hall, there are all the things of baseball. There are the clubhouse lockers where Cobb and DiMaggio unlaced their cleats, the pictures of dugouts where batting orders and bonds of friendship and mentorship were formed by the likes of Anderson and DeRocher. It's all there, photographs and artifacts of great moments on the field, Gibby's home run, Rivera's strikeout, Gehrig's speech, the moments that were built together on the field. It's also there, the solitary magic of the pitcher's mound, where man faces man, a duel, preparation, precision, pressure. And then finally there's the great hall, the hall that's called the gallery, a room where the faces of the greats have been memorialized, frozen in time to be celebrated and revered. And it's a great place, the Hall of Fame. It's a place of history and memory and moments. And I've been thinking a lot about the Hall of Fame lately, because this event reminds me a little bit of the Hall of Fame induction. It reminds me of induction weekend, where people from around the country or around the world perhaps gather at a hallowed locale and remember those who have departed from the game but have left an indelible mark on it. And just as people walk through the halls of Cooperstown's Hall of Fame to remember and to see again, it kind of seems like that's what we've done here today. We've tried to catch a glimpse of Ed Pappas again. But we didn't see Ed Pappas from afar. We knew him. He was our friend, our mentor, our colleague, our coach, our father. And we don't need to travel to see Ed Pappas enshrined in a hall. Monuments to great men and women are significant and useful, but Ed Pappas won't be confined to a building. Certainly not to the photograph that's hanging in Menudian Hall. Or an artifact. Edward is enshrined in our hearts, in our minds, and in our memories. And we don't need to travel to upstate New York or even midtown Detroit to see the artifacts of memory, the artifacts of greatness, because we still see him. We still see him in the clubhouse, after the game or before the game, in the booth at Mr. Mike's, at that table at Lely's. We see him negotiating with the maitre d' at Pegasus for a table he knew he'd get, while a line stretched out the door, and then complaining that I hate when they do that. We see him sitting at the Roma, telling the newest vile joke he'd heard from Neil Shine, and then laughing before he got to the punchline. Again. Yeah, we still see him. We see him in the dugout, his office, making batting orders, looking over pitching rotations with Vicky, managing, working out schedules, considering a new hire, preparing a lesson again and again. We still see him in your office, talking, prodding, questioning, planning, leading. We still see him sitting with a student or a former student over coffee or a drink, listening to the plans for the latest publication article. We still see him at Central States, at the Palmer House, hosting, laughing, talking, remembering you after all those years. We see him sitting with you at a desk or a restaurant table, both deftly praising you and making you feel like you could do a little bit better next time. We still see him. We see him on the field, game time, in the mix. We see him in the conference rooms and the classrooms. We see him preparing, pushing, and advocating. We see him never shying away from the requirements of his job, the work that was to be done, never shrinking from hiring a hiring challenge or a confrontation with a dean or a provost or a president. We still see him walking the halls of Manukian, his own hallowed hall. We see him with that wry smile, that ambling walk. We see him asking us how to make a PowerPoint or use the copy machine. We see him carrying the same ratty briefcase year after year, stuffed with yellow legal pads and copies, as he prepared for every class like it was his first time. We still see him. From the clubhouse to the dugout to the game on the field, we remember him and we see him still. But there was no place that we loved to see him more than when he was on the mound, pitching. The guy loved to pitch. Year after year, 60 years, 62 years of pitching in the classroom. 62 years of standing in front of students of all ages and teaching them that communication is the central skill necessary for success in life. 62 years of executive classes, of conferences, college freshmen, conference panels, holiday faculty parties. 62 years of speaking at conferences and retirements and celebrations and things like this. 62 years on the mound. And we can see him handling the ball in his glove, if you will, kind of fingering the seams, deciding which pitch to throw next, thinking about where he wanted to place the pitch. It makes me think of times when my brother or sister and I think many of you too, would see him about ready to deliver a pitch, and you'd think, oh, God, no, not that pitch. But he'd throw it anyway and smile and say, what am I doing? And sure, his fastball wasn't as fast, but he threw a great curveball. And his changeup was the best. And no matter how wild and stiff he was in the bullpen, when he stood on the mound, when he was brought in to do his work, he could still find the strike zone whenever he wanted to. That's why 6 months ago, that's why a year ago this week, he was still pitching. still teaching, still throwing strikes. He was 85 years old, still in the game. Give me the ball, coach. My arm feels good today. So we still see him, don't we? The smile, the walk, the sport coats. I wish I'd worn a coat so I could pull out these papers out of the coat pocket. The baseball ties. We still see him as he beamed when he saw you. We still see him saying something awkward or off color, then realizing it and chuckling to himself. But oh, how we'd love to see him. I mean, really see him one more time. You know, to see him emerge from the dugout, doff his hat, the way Williams never would. To see him step over third base chalk line, to see him stand on the mound in silence, as we stood as one applauding him, showering him with the sound of praise that only the greats are privileged to hear. But instead, we're left with the artifact of memory. We're left with the sadness of a season that's come to an end. We're left with the longing to see one last pitch, one crack of the bat, one sound of the ball in a leather mitt. We're left with the sights and sounds of the game, of his game. And yet we're not sad. We're not defeated. We're not like a team that has never tasted glory. No, we're the privileged ones, the lucky ones. We're unbowed, for we were in the clubhouse. We were in the dugout. We were on the field with one of the greats. We were there. We saw him. We saw him pitch. We knew him when. When I was a kid, my dad took me to a Tigers game to see Mark Fidrich pitch. It was Fidrich's second year, and we were late, of course. And as we walked up the ramp entering the park, I could hear the crowd explode with cheers as Fidrich struck out the side in the top of the first inning. And I'll never forget that moment because the sound told me that I was in a special moment. Even before I saw the game itself, I knew that this was a game that I would remember for the rest of my life. And somehow in my little, 8-year-old or 9-year-old brain, I said, remember this. And I think that's so much of my dad's life, something special. The sense that you were around a special man, a man who played the game well, who respected others, who played with him, who helped others be their best, and who stayed in the game until the final out. That's greatness. And as the cheering subsides, and as the tarp is pulled on the infield, and the crowd disperses, and we're all alone, and we have our memories of those moments. Famed Dodger manager Tommy Lasorda once said, there are 3 kinds of ball players. Those who make it happen, those who watch it happen, and those who say, what happened? Well, Ed Pappas made it happen in our lives, in our careers, in our homes. Ed Pappas was a difference maker, a playmaker, and a Hall of Famer. Thanks.
Well, those were some amazing eulogies. I have been in touch with our tab room, and I have the results. We have a 9-way tie. I want to thank all the speakers for your wonderful remarks today and for helping us celebrate the life of such an amazing person. My own experience with Ed over 32 years, I knew he was a constant source of optimism and support. He was a tenacious advocate for others and always saw the best in people. We have begun to raise funds to support the Edward and Eunice Pappas Endowed Scholarship, and I invite anybody who's interested in participating in that to contact me. It will be a wonderful legacy for Ed and Eunice. I also invite you to join us all for a reception in the foyer where we continue to share stories, some of which will be true.